When the Supergirl movie was released in 1984, the main antagonist was Selena, a sorceress witch played by Faye Dunaway. But who is Selena? Today we'll tackle that question on Villain Obscura, a series dedicated to exploring forgotten, maligned, or obscured villains that nobody but the most dedicated fans remember. In 1984, Supergirl's solo series was wrapping up after a 23-issue run. Launching in 1982 under the unwieldy name of The Daring New Adventures of Supergirl, the series was a reset, returning young adult soap opera actress Linda Lee Danvers and her alter ego Supergirl back to college and moving her from New York City, where her soap opera Secret Hearts was filmed, to Chicago, the Windy City. Written by Paul Cooperberg and with art by comics legend Carmine Infantino, this series hit the ground running, establishing a new supporting cast for Supergirl, as well as new villains in the form of Psy, the Gang, and Reacton. Behind the scenes, production of the Supergirl movie had begun, and producers felt that Supergirl's costume, hot pants and a flowing blouse, were a little dated by the early 1980s, and they requested DC Comics come up with an updated costume for the Girl of Steel. So in issue 13, a new costume debuted. A few issues later, in issue 17, Supergirl would get an 80s style perm and headband, bringing her into the fashion-forward, aerobicized look of 1983. The movie would ditch the headband and semi-perm, going for a more classic Supergirl hairdo and save us from the odd-looking headband. It sort of works in comics, but in live action, not so much. So now that there was a hero with a cool costume for the story, we needed a villain. It seemed obvious that Supergirl's primary villain in the movie should be a woman, one who was as wicked and powerful as Supergirl was good and powerful. And one of the main weaknesses of the Superman family in this era was magic. Thus, Supergirl's publishing history was full of viable candidates. In the early 1970s, Mike Sekowsky, fresh off his reinvention of Wonder Woman into a mod martial arts inspired Emma Pill knockoff, came aboard to reinvigorate the Maid of Might. One of his first moves was to give her an arch foe, a villain named Starfire. No, not the alien from Tamaran who would later become a member of the Teen Titans, but one who was from Earth and had more than a passing resemblance to the villain Dr. Cyber Sekowsky had created in Wonder Woman. Except Starfire had a patch over one eye. Why did she wear an eye patch? We'll never know. But it was pretty fabulous. And while Sekowsky did his best to build up Starfire, she never quite caught on. And by the end of his run, she's revealed Scooby-Doo style to be responsible for some sort of fake haunting and carted away with her henchmen to prison, never to be seen again. Also during Sekowsky's run, he imported one of his Wonder Woman creations, a red-haired witch from the past named Morgana. But this was not the witch that would crop up in 1984. Morgana was more of a spoiler-type character. She came along, created mischief that the heroes had to clean up, but by the end of the issue, everything would be alright, and everyone was on mostly friendly terms. Also, Morgana could return to cause mischief another day. Except she didn't. After her issue of Supergirl, which was only her second comic book appearance, Morgana was never seen again. So this is not the witch we're looking for. Next, let's skip ahead to Superman Family 204, where Supergirl, as Linda Danvers, is a student advisor at New Athens College in Florida. And Supergirl must stop a powerful witch who plans to end all evil somehow. It's not really clearly defined. And to do so, Supergirl has to pull the moon out of orbit, which doesn't destroy Florida or the Earth. Comic book science was a little wonky in this era. Luckily, Linda Danvers was there to stop the switch and her celestial plotting. And despite one of the meanings of the name Selena being celestial being, this character was not the debut of Selena. It was the debut of the Evil Enchantress. Evil because when she first appeared in Strange Adventures 187, the Enchantress was actually a heroic character. And she continued as a heroic character for two more appearances in Strange Adventures in the late 1960s, until being banished to comic book limbo before returning in a reprint of her stories from Strange Adventures in issue 417 of Adventure Comics. Her next appearance after this was the arc starting in Superman Family 204. The Enchantress would go on to be a member of the Forgotten Villains for a few issues of DC Comics Presents, in a costume and look we'd never see again, before being established post-Crisis on Infinite Earths as a member of the Suicide Squad, where she'd be depowered and disappeared in 1988, only to reappear in 1999's Day of Judgment event. After this, she would appear regularly in DC Comics over the years, culminating with her having a spot in the New 52 as a member of Justice League Dark, and a live-action appearance in the Suicide Squad movie, played by actress Cara Delevingne. Soon, in 1984, the Enchantress was firmly on the path to this more dark, villainous anti-hero incarnation. But she was not the villainous witch chosen for the Supergirl movie. Which brings us right back to Supergirl 13, where Supergirl changes her costume. Here we're introduced to a red-headed villain who bears more than a passing resemblance to Faye Dunaway, and a few of her movie outfits. Here we're introduced to Black Star, primed to be one of Supergirl's greatest threats, and having two R's in her name to avoid copyright or trademark infringement with Filmation's Black Star. Black Star, civilian ID, Rachel Berkowitz, had the power of the very cosmos at her command. Prior to this, most of Supergirl's villains were vastly underwhelming and mostly forgettable. I mean, you've already forgotten about both Starfire and Morgana, and we just talked about them. But why create a villain for the movie? Why wouldn't the filmmakers have chosen an existing Supergirl villain? She had a fairly expansive, if not entirely competent or memorable rogues gallery by 1984. There was Satan Girl, Black Flame, who was a masked villain from Kandor, Lex Luthor's niece, Nastalia Luthor, but her name is Nasty. No, her first name ain't Baby, it's Kara Zor-El if you're nasty. But what about Night Flame, or the Master Jailer, or Lisla Lar? Lisla Lar, or Lesla Lar? Who knows, there's a lot of L's there. What about these alien fish dudes? They are 100% tentacle free. While Psy, the members of the gang, or even Reacton might have been solid fits for a movie villain in today's superhero movie culture, in 1984 there was no live-action superhero movie culture beyond the Superman movies. Translating comic book heroes to the big screen was already seen as a bit of a challenge. They didn't quite translate in live action, which is why most of them faced villains that were more earthly. In Superman you had Lex Luthor, and even Wonder Woman, who had had a successful TV series for several years. That show didn't really even feature any of Wonder Woman's most popular costume villains. She didn't throw down with the Cheetah, or Dr. Psycho, or the Duke of Deception, or Mouseman, yes, not even Mouseman, once on her weekly show. So the Supergirl movie introduced an all-new villain, Selena, who would translate better to the movie screen. Early drafts of the movie start with the villain Selena slightly younger and before her rise to power. She's described as a beautiful blonde, likely at the point where producers were still trying to get Dolly Parton to play Selena. Dolly would decline the role, stating she wasn't going to play a witch. But if this was for religious reasons or because she just didn't want to play a villain, none of the reporting I could find on this gives a clear reason for why Dolly didn't want to play a witch. And instead of Supergirl in 1984, she'd star in Rhinestone with Sylvester Stallone, which is a movie neither of them are famous for. So while she avoided one box office fail of Supergirl, she didn't fare much better with Rhinestone. And Rhinestone has not acquired the cult status or fan base that Supergirl has over the years. With Dolly declining and other prospects such as Jane Fonda and Goldie Hawn not panning out, producers came to Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway made her debut in film in the late 1960s. After a few roles in poorly received films that failed to land with audiences or critics, Dunaway landed the lead role in Arthur Penn's 1967 dramatization of real-life criminals Bonnie and Clyde Barrow. For this role, Faye Dunaway received critical acclaim, prestigious nominations, and became one of the most bankable actresses in Hollywood at the time. Bonnie and Clyde also helped launch the so-called New Hollywood movement in film, where a new crop of young and passionate directors would reinvigorate the American film industry. Dunaway herself would star in several films considered quintessential to this movement. Included were 1968's The Thomas Crown Affair, 1970's Little Big Man, 1974's Chinatown and The Towering Inferno, 1975's 3 Days of the Condor, and Network in 1976. She would win an Academy Award for her role in Network. Her next big role was in The Eyes of Laura Mars, directed by Irvin Kershner, who would later direct The Empire Strikes Back. After this, she would star in 1981's Mommy Dearest, based on the first celebrity tell-all by Christina Crawford, the daughter of actress Joan Crawford. However, Mommy Dearest was not the success everyone hoped for. While it's now considered a camp and cult classic, it was not a box office success nor a critical darling, and definitely not what one would have expected for Faye Dunaway at that stage of her career. In fact, there's a lot of speculation that Mommy Dearest killed her career. Through the lens of our modern day sensibilities, Mommy Dearest is a fun watch, but 1980s sensibilities were very different in the face of the sort of high camp melodramatization of real events and people. It's something that's a little bit more commonplace to modern audiences in a time where things like the Real Housewives franchise, video blog scandals, and YouTube and TikTok drama permeate our media platforms and streaming services. Also complicating things was that Faye Dunaway was no longer a young ingenue type and was moving into her 40s. In modern day, actresses are just hitting their strides and getting their best roles in their 30s and 40s. But things were pretty different in the 1980s, with roles for actresses who were no longer in the youngest demographic relegated to mothers, teachers, and character roles, while men in the same age got to sink their teeth into meatier, more demanding roles and date women young enough to be their daughters. There are many stories throughout her career of Faye Dunaway being difficult on the set. This extended to the set of Supergirl, where it's alleged she was threatened with dismissal due to perceived diva-like behavior. But over the years, these type of narratives have started to become overshadowed by co-stars and other members of various productions who instead relay memories of Faye Dunaway as being a perfectionist who cared about the craft of acting. Interviews with her co-star in Supergirl, Brenda Vaccaro, who played her sidekick Bianca, have Vaccaro relaying that she told Dunaway to lighten up and have fun with the lighter fare rather than taking it all so seriously. In the role of Selena, Faye Dunaway has been accused of overacting, hamming it up, and chewing scenery. But in retrospect, she's just playing a comic book villain with the same gusto one would expect for a comic book villain in 1980s movies, and in attempting to infuse that role with the same gravitas that she brought to her roles in Bonnie and Clyde, Network, and Chinatown. Audiences in 1984 just weren't sure how to take this in a movie that suffered from a muddled script with an admittedly half-baked plot, and more than a few plot holes. Add to this the distribution issues when Warner Brothers opted not to release the film like it had previous installments of the Superman franchise, and sadly, events conspired to leave Supergirl less than a blockbuster success. Definitely not what one expected from a Superman movie. In the movie, Selena isn't given much in the way of a backstory. She's introduced at a picnic with her lover, Nigel, who is a teacher at the Midvale School for Girls. Nigel was training her in the art of black magic, with Selena's end goal being world domination, because it's the 80s, why not? Nigel accuses her of being impatient and not dedicated to the training. Their picnic is interrupted by the film's MacGuffin, the Omega Hedron, which grants Selena great magical power almost immediately. She quickly ditches Nigel, as she should, and together with her sidekick and best friend Bianca, sets about taking over the world, with the side quest to make hunky groundskeeper Ethan fall in love with her via magic. And of course, having to face off against Supergirl, who must defeat her evil machinations, as well as recover the Omega Hedron, which will allow Supergirl to save her people back in Argo City, and of course win the heart of Ethan. Even in early drafts of the script that start with the younger Selena, she isn't given much motivation or character development beyond her quest for power. Earlier versions of the script did include Superman, and in those Selena captured Superman, and Supergirl also had to save her cousin. However, Christopher Reeve's decision to not participate in the Supergirl movie saw this rewritten, and Superman is just away from Earth on a mission when Selena makes her bid to take over the world. The character of Selena seems to have suffered from lackluster response to the movie, as well as the cancellation before the movie's release of the Supergirl ongoing comic book series. Other than a comic book adaptation of the movie, there was nowhere for a comic book Selena to debut. Supergirl herself would be cancelled as a character when, in 1985, DC Comics decided to kill Kara Zor-El during their 12-issue limited series Crisis on Infinite Earths. Supergirl was not even included in Kenner's Superpowers collection of 1984 to 1986, despite the iconic lineup of characters presented in that toy line. While Supergirl was part of Kenner's original proposal to DC to land the license, the character herself never made the leap to plastic fame during the run of that iconic toy line. Supergirl is rumored to be one of the characters planned for the fourth wave of figures, but these never made it to production, and so far as my research shows, did not make it further than concept art. Wave 4 also would have been released in late 1987 if production had continued on the line, 3 years after the release of Supergirl's movie. So it's unlikely there were any plans at any point to release figures or dolls based on the movie. So poor Selena never even had a chance to be released as an action figure, despite being the main villain in what was intended to be a blockbuster hit. For more on unproduced women characters in the Superpowers line, as well as a soon-to-be-released video on Kenner's plans for Supergirl, I highly recommend my friend Andrew's channel, Gady's Toys. He covers the women characters never produced for a classic toy line that we all know and love. As for Selena's fate in comic books, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, in-universe continuity was rewritten so that Supergirl never existed, making Superman the sole surviving Kryptonian. And while the Supergirl concept would be resurrected fairly quickly in 1988, it was not as Kara Zor-El, but as a convoluted and at times confusing character called Matrix, who had to be twisted and shaped to work within the mandate that Superman was the sole survivor of Krypton. By the time Kara Zor-El was resurrected in 2004, in the pages of Superman and Batman, the character of Selena was long forgotten, and likely not even given a second thought by writers or editors at DC Comics. It would not be until 2017 in Supergirl issue 10 that a character inspired by Selena would debut. However, while this character is called Selena and has magic-based powers, she is far removed from the character presented in the Supergirl movie. This isn't so much Selena from the movie as a character inspired by the movie character with the name of Selena that kind of pays homage to the character played by Faye Dunaway. With recent figures from McFarlane Toys revisiting some of the 1980s and 1990s DC films, it's possible that at some point McFarlane Toys could produce figures drawn from the Supergirl movie. It seems unlikely, though. The focus of McFarlane Toys seems to be the current DC media and Batman films, and even if he were to get around to Supergirl from the 1984 movie, it seems unlikely he would pick Selena to be immortalized in plastic. All this means it's highly unlikely Selena will ever become anything more than a footnote both in Supergirl history and Faye Dunaway's filmography, which likely means Selena will always be an obscure and mostly forgotten villain. If you enjoyed this video, you should hit the like, and if you'd like to see more like this, you should subscribe. I will be doing more videos on obscure and mostly forgotten villains in the weeks and months to come. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.